prayer to the city as you say over and over to yourself, the river is enough. The river is enough. The river is truly enough. I leave you with that thought. Let us take a short break so you can rehydrate, use the restroom, see the bartender. I'm about to take questions one-on-one for a bit. Shout out to Plumber Chocolate Factory who's baking today if you smell the cocoa. Top of Kinsey Street.
Do not sit in the stairwells.
Coffee house.
Those are stairs, not chairs.
And I used to, okay. Stacy, I'll stick around and break it and go. Then I just like go over to the factory, so I'd ride from Milwaukee and David up to Kinsey, Milwaukee, go to the factory store, get a big bag of chocolate, unsweetened chocolate points right from the factory, go back and we make brownies. Too fresher than that. Yeah. Gone now, but I used to bike to work, and at one time, Robert, right, Vanilla Bread had a place about that right across the street. I go to work, you know, find a cup of coffee and just inhale bread and chocolate foods. Bacon bread and chocolate.
It's so funny because I say like those donut shops and they put it like the smell.
Right. I say the outsiders. I specifically try to say outsiders to say to inculcate that the Native Americans were already here. They were here forever. What's that?
I did not catch that in your remarks.
Yeah, I tried to say outsiders. I could maybe say that. I could amend that and say that's what outside of the Native Americans, the first outsiders would have looked like too. We should do that. Should add that. Yeah. There's a whole thing, you know. The whole thing with Usabo. Usabo sold his land to John Kinsey. You know, that first area there. There's a whole backstory there. Kinsey was a fur trader, and he had an agent who secured the land in Italy. There's a whole history there. What happened to Kinsey and Lee? Lee that they were in the head. And if they had some sort of dispute, Kinsey, who became like the father of Chicago, he was married into the Native American tribes, his wife. So when things got hot, he actually went out and moved the tribes for about a year, and then he came back into town. It's just really that. There's a whole history about that. Thanks. I should do that. Put that in the album. Just a couple extra words. It makes it clear. Hey folks, welcome back. I'd like to give a shout out to San Antonio, Texas right now. Why? Because San Antonio, Texas has a river walk they did in the 1980s, and Chicago took note. We saw what they were doing was a lot of what Daniel Burnham was originally about with the plan of Chicago. In 1990, we started our own urban waterways design project, and one of the things that came out of that, protecting and preserving the river, was that developers needed to provide access to the people. And that's what happens with all this new development. You get these parks going on. Look at the one at River Point. I just particularly like the nautical windows. They're perfect artistically because you're on water. Let me tell you, those are functional. Those are actually exhaust ports for railroad exhaust, because you're looking at a building that is built on stilts. It's a land bridge built over top Amtrak and Metro train lines going in to downtown Chicago's Union Station. In the 1800s, Chicago gave the railroads all these prime riverfront land, so we would be the railroad hub of America. Meaning, crossing the country, you stopped in Chicago and left a little money behind. Air rights really means you get to lease the air from the railroad, build, and stay out of their way. And that's why 150 North Riverside looks like an inverted pyramid. You got the railroad tracks on the west, the river on the east, and only a 2-acre footprint. So you know what? For 30 years, nobody touched this lot. 2 acres is kind of a tiny footprint to try and put a big building on. And then, firm that did this 2017 building, Getcha Partners, they said, we'll take the challenge. We can give you a building inside of a park for your Riverwalk because we don't need all that space. We'll use 20%, we'll expand as we go up. 20% of the base, 80% for the park, can deliver 8 floors in, then 54 floors above that. Now wait a minute. If you cut away what would be your outer supporting walls, what's holding the building up? I think they're working on the same principle I'm trying to get back to with all my yoga and Pilates. A strong center core. It's the K-sides, my friends. You know, Chicago, the Great Lakes were carved out by the glaciers with the really soft soil behind. So to get through that hard soil, that softer soil, it's something solid like that rock in Chicago. We're going to go down 30 feet. In fact, we're going to this in Chicago. K-sides, archetype architecture, Chicago, concrete. And as Mr. Chuck Benton might say, down, down, down. That's when you hit that bottom, and then they settle about 5 feet deeper. Now, the same firm, Getcha Partners, is doing the new Bank of America building coming up on our left. This was the largest concrete bar since 1990. Also, it's the tallest new building downtown. Right now, 15 feet since 1990. Now, some of you Chicagoans might remember there was a building here called Chicago. If you look, it was supposed to be design. It actually was made to look like a factory. Not too many people cried when it went away, okay? But the Army Corps of Engineers was working on the project with them, and they had a voice, and they said, well, I'll tell you what, you know, nobody cared too much for that old building and tore it down. But that General Gruen building was a part of Chicago's history. Maybe you could find a way to honor it. And they did. Check it out, right at eye level. They saved the old corrugated aluminum walls of the building they tore down. They gave them a second life as part of the Riverwalk. I love when new architecture remembers the old, because sometimes in order to see where you're going in this life, it never hurts to look back at where you've been. I cannot give you the White Cliffs of Dover. Will you settle for the Art Cliffs of Deco? For we come to an Art Deco corridor with the Chicago Daily News building on our right, the first building to offer a public plaza downtown. And on our left, 1928 Art Deco described as a civic opera building. I often call this a perfect marriage of pragmatism and art. You see, they start with the Opera House, and then they surround themselves with 3 corporate towers. This is pretty smart. Now the opera's a landlord. They always have revenue coming in. I'm often asked, why does it say Civic Opera Pavilion with a V instead of a U? It's still building. When you had a pre-16th century Latin alphabet, those letters are interchangeable, right? That's what that alphabet is. Oh, here's a literary tip. Remember that alphabet when you read the Italian novelist Umberto Eco in The Name of the Rose? It'll help you solve the mystery. Now this wondrous Art Deco style, 1930. What happens after Art Deco in 1930 in architecture in America? Nothing. Nada. Zilch. Zippo. Zero. Why? You know, the Great Depression, World War II. And then after the war, the 50s into the 60s, the Bauhaus architects said, oh, they're coming over here. The first director of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius, sends up at Yale. Mies van der comes to Chicago in 1938. He designs half the campus of Illinois Institute of Technology in the modern boxy look, and boom, modernism is the style of the day. Now by the 60s, look at your right, this is an air rights project called Gateway Center, and we're full-blown into modernism. I am going to take you in a time machine and show you the evolution of modernist style before your very eyes. We begin in the 1960s. Let me check the radio. Superman or Green Lantern, name God, nothing on me. We're in the 60s. And that means skeleton skin in space, pure Miesian modernism. Mies van der is so known for the black box modernist style. Even though he's not the architect, his name is an adjective for the style. Let's set my time machine forward into the 70s. Well, there's a port on Western Bay. Okay, we're in the 70s. And look at the white building, and I take you into international style. And I would say, wherever you're from on the planet Earth, you know a building like that white building. That was the idea of the international style. Here was their idea. The future's moving too fast. We don't know what businesses really need, so we have to be totally neutral. And we should put everyone in the world in the same box, one building, No historic precedent that you can put in any country around the globe. And when the international schools, so many of those buildings showed up in the 70s, I would have bet you a sandwich that I could put you on a jet and blindfold you, and I could have dropped you off in any major urban area anywhere. And right at first, you wouldn't know where you were at, because every city started looking like every other city. This is Tuesday, this must be Belgium. Now, we're going to take a little detour and look at the Midwest Commodities Exchange building. That's the building that has that truss tube support. You see those big X's? Does anyone remember when financial traders used to be on the floor and they would be throwing hand signals before digital trading? Well, that's what that was. That was a trading floor. You didn't want anything in the way. So instead of supporting the ceiling inside, they supported outside. Now let's go all the way into the 1980s. Don't you want me, baby? We're in the 80s, and look at gateway number 4, and I bring you full circle to that idea of contextualism. Contextualism, after modernism, architectural light, there's more to life than a box. We want to relate to the environment. So look at the curve of this building. That is attempting to follow the curve of the river. And then the beveled mirrored glass, of course, it's to cut down solar glare, but in an added feature, it's cool artistically, it reflects the architecture around it. To recap, we went from black boxes in the 60s to white boxes in the 70s to mirrored buildings in the 80s, and contemporary today, I would say everything is more and more about transparency. Glass, glass, and glass. Right now I have a confession to make. Look at the building on our left with a Lego block of red. We tour guides hardly ever talked about it. It did not excite us until 7 years ago when I believe the owner sat down and said, let us try to get on the tour guide's map by putting ourselves on the map. Thus they would spend $800,000 and have a beautiful map of the Chicago River painted in the building and put themselves on it. The red dot is this building. You are here. See that? That's the North Branch. You've been up there. East Branch, Navy Pier, we're going up. Please sign my petition at change.org so that every major American city will soon have map buildings. This is totally personal. It's so myself, who's been a bicyclist for 35 years in Chicago. The next time I have to rent a car for the city of Atlanta, Georgia, I'm going to get off that Cloverleaf Highway they have down there in under 3 hours' time. Hopefully. Coming up on the right, adaptive reuse of the Midway, the former Chicago Central Post Office, which in 1921 was the largest post office ever at 2.7 million square feet. Oh yeah! Maybe because the mail order catalog business was invented in Chicago in 1872 by a friend of the farmer, A. Montgomery Ward, followed by Sears and Roebuck. By 1995, elevators slowed down the mail, the post office moved out, leaving this building abandoned and alone as developers came and went, announcing grandiose plans and all disappearing like a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing. And then 601 West Coast shows up. I do my homework. 601 West turns out to be a New York firm. Had a big hand development west side of Manhattan in New York City. I said, they got a track record. Then I find out they own the Civic Opera building. And boom, you know they did it right. They invest $600,000 in or $200,000 more. They attract PepsiCo. We got 16 stories of an office building got a move here instead. Walgreens Corporate, Google Freight. Now, that's really going to become something. That's the way you revitalize it. Let's go to our left. Notice the skyline of tall buildings. We're getting some drop off. But there's a lot of condo activity. About 3,600 residential units between here and Roosevelt Road, as people want to go back into the city. Now, the reason you do not see the really tall office buildings, though, is because the proper business district of Chicago, the Loop, had definite borders. You had the river on the north, the lake on the east, south and west, you would come out by railroad. Back in the day, if you were business, you had to squeeze downtown where the action was. Think of it this way, think way back, before cell phones, before email, dare I say it, before text messaging. Business was the art of the handshake. You would meet your customer not Facebook to Facebook, but face to face. In my day, I used to put two human beings in the same room, but they were just sitting there talking to each other. OMG, imagine sin. So necessity, as the saying goes, was the mother of invention in Chicago. We had no choice. We could not sprawl out. We learned how to go higher and higher. And I must give a tip of the hat to Mr. Otis and the Otis Elevator Company. Did you realize, of course, without the technology of the Otis elevator brakes, it'd still be on the first few floors. Oh, by the way, Otis Elevator has a regional office up north in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's terribly sad. Otis Elevator Minneapolis is in the one-story building. Big humanity. Coming up on our left, can you guess the architect of River City? I bet you can. Can you see that can only be Bertrand Goldberg, same architect who did the corn-cob shape Marina City Towers, which is on the top of the building. See, Goldberg was a modernist when he thought outside the box. Unintended when I say that. When his teacher Mies van der Spears took all those boxes in the 60s, he rebelled. He got out his journal. You know what he wrote in his journal? I rebel against a century of static. I rebel against the straight line. I refuse to remake humanity in the image of a machine. Now, you remember the Marina City Towers? He likened it to a flower. So now he goes to snakes. He said River City came to him as a mythical river snake. Think of a snake sunning itself in the grass. And it would have looked like a snake. It was never finished. He wanted 5 buildings, do you see? You see the next bridge down there. So it would have really looked like a snake, yeah, had he done all 5 buildings. He was a free thinker dancing to a different drummer. And many of us see an invisible hand guiding Bertrand Goldberg. That invisible hand would belong to the greatest free-thinking architect. You may know him from Barcelona, the great Antonio Gaudi. Gaudi's famous quote, Berg said it all the time, there are no right angles in nature. This is again a city within the city, 70 boat slips, urban. Daycare is in there, everything you might need or want. I do like what he did too. He put a public area between the condos. It's called River Road. He tried to liken it to a European village street. The idea that you would have a safe workspace to come out of your apartment and greet your neighbors. Now friends, a little sacred geography. If we were to hike north about a half mile to where you see the radio tower in the distance, we would come to Dakota Street, the Chicago Fire Academy, where firefighters get their training. But where do you think they built the Fire Academy, boyo? Do you know, ironically enough, firefighters get their training directly atop what was the O'Leary Barn, where on that fateful night, what's that date for the test? October 8, 1871, Daisy the cow kicked over the kerosene lantern, causing the Great Chicago Fire about a half mile from us. It all started there, winds carried it downtown. Now sure, that's where the O'Leary Barn started, and that's where the fire started. Now it's the Fire Academy. And yes, there was a Mrs. O'Leary, and sure, she had cows and so milk. But no, the cows really had nothing to do with the fire. I come before you today to say 3 words: forgive the cow. Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were framed, they were set up, they got a raw deal. The truth, I will tell you the truth. No one will ever know what really caused the Great Chicago Fire. Quite frankly, in a city made of wood, rickety wood buildings with no building regulations, fires happened all the time. You know what we do know about? The cow story. And we've known the truth for over 100 years. It was a hoax. It was made up. In 1893, Michael Ahern was a newspaper reporter being interviewed during the World's Fair. And he admitted, he said, oh yeah, it was a slow news day. So the story about Miss O'Leary, that was one of mine. We didn't have anything cool to write about, so we made it up. And they always made the drawings, they only had cartoons of Mrs. O'Leary that made it look like a witch. They said, hey, come on, want to quote for a painting? He said, no, I had nothing to do with that fire, now leave me alone. And every year on the anniversary of the fire, kids would throw rocks in their house and everything. So, maybe it's too little too late, but on October 6th, 2 days before the anniversary of the fire, 1997, well over 100 years or so later, the city of Chicago decides to put things right. They hold a city council meeting. Chicago historians come forward and they prove without a shadow of a doubt that Mrs. O'Leary and her cows, as the deposition she gave the police proved, she was sleeping through the whole fire. And you do well to actually look instead at the O'Leary's neighbor, a shady cat by the name of Pegleg Sullivan, who reported the fire. Now friends, the theory asks, we must ask, what is old Pegleg Sullivan doing snooping around the O'Leary's barn in the middle of the night? And the theory says he's trying to steal beer. He starts the fire to cover up his own crime. So Mrs. O'Leary and her cows were totally exonerated. The city actually issued for it a formal proclamation and gave her to her descendants that very day. Huzzah for cows, they got their day. Now, I can't let that fire go just yet, my friends. That fire is always on my mind. It's in my, right here in my pineal gland behind my third eye.